My name is Pernilla Ohrstedt. I am Swedish, but I'm working as a designer and architect in London. I studied architecture in London and have since been working in the intersection of art and architecture. And have recently set up a design practice with Asif Khan.
My name is Asif Khan. I'm also an architect and designer, born in London, and I've been working across the fields of design and architecture at various scales, and recently set up a studio with Pernilla Ohrstedt.
So the pavilion is called the Future Memory Pavilion, and it was commissioned by British Council, Royal Academy of Arts and the Preservation of Monuments Board. And it's a response to a kind of larger theme by Royal Academy of Arts, which is future memory.
It's the first time that the Royal Academy has commissioned someone to respond to their architecture program with a building proposal. So for us, we feel like really fortunate to receive the commission. Our brief was more about tackling the subject matter and less so providing functional requirements that a normal piece of architecture would. So it was kind of carte blanche, which is for an architect like an amazing.
It's an amazing honour to be able to. It's an amazing way to be allowed to work. And I think also the other challenge that we had was to try to make a structure that can be experienced in a quite short time frame, because it's a permeable structure that's open to the climate, and in sort of Singapore it's very hot and it'll start raining, so you need to really be able to take this pavilion in very quickly, but having an intense experience in that time frame.
Yeah, more challenging for the visitor perhaps, but then also confronting the visitor with their own environment in a new way. So, and using architecture as a frame for that. And just for that to be an acceptable thing to do is quite a tricky thing to get across, that it's going to be successful, because we don't know actually the result, but it's an interesting experiment, and it's we're really curious about the way this thing gets occupied.
Sand and ice are basically two materials that we, in our sort of research, linked to both really important materials in shaping current-day Singapore. So they carry a lot of memory. Hopefully they can give a reading of the way that the urban landscape evolves. So ice, for example, was starting to be imported in the 1850s, and huge chunks of ice, lake ice basically, were transported all the way from New England to Singapore in ships covered in sawdust to keep it kind of cool, and then that was taken into ice houses to sort of cool environments and food, etc. In a way, you can say that with that ice was also imported a kind of expectation for a New England climate indoors in Singapore, which previously wasn't possible. So this, the fact that we're sitting here now in an air-conditioned, kind of perfectly cool environment, really, in a way, comes from those lakes in New England.
And the sand, similarly, is a wild material which in the building industry is harnessed for construction. So turning something which is on a beach or at the bottom of the ocean into something which becomes a skyscraper or a bit of land, or turns a swamp into a car park or something. This incredibly powerful but simple material that we all know. So literally hills that were part of Singapore's landscape were cut over time to infill swampy areas. So kind of it happens in a lot of islands or the perimeter of countries where you need to sort of solidify and expand. What's very interesting about that is it has an effect on simple things like landmarks and kind of imageability of landscape, and so one type of monumentality of Singapore's landscape is being transformed into another type of monumentality, so from kind of landscape into architecture. Our project uses that raw material, which is the kind of facilitator of that, and puts it in a new context. It's a homage to this material. This sand becomes Singapore, like it's going to be used in land reclamation or being used in building industry. So it's like a monument to the monument.
I mean, I think it's a great way for to kind of showcase what art and architecture can do for the sort of everyday urban environment. So hopefully I think what you see in these kind of small experimental structure are things that will be implemented in the kind of everyday larger building, and that's what we would try to do.
Yeah.
You know, just because you move up in scale shouldn't mean that you have to move away from the experimental nature or the very kind of tactile and direct nature of these smaller projects.
Singapore, in terms of architecture, think small and think big at the same time. Don't get scared of the small stuff. In the way that you're kind of treating your food culture, you're really enjoying your food culture and all the kind of little details of different dishes and stuff, even though it's kind of widespread and mainstream. It needs to, maybe the same approach to architecture isn't a bad thing. We need to do the same in London as well. It's global.
I'm wondering if, like everywhere, it's going to have to think a little bit more about the kind of footprints that construction leaves behind, because it's basically making spaces with minimal means, and this thing that spaces can kind of pop up and disappear and pop up again means that there's less sort of infrastructure, less kind of dead spaces, or really making the most spatially while sort of leaving less traces.
Pop up implies something that kind of blossoms and dies. But actually these things can be more like, they can have rhythms of their own, and that's maybe a new typology of architecture. It doesn't have to be just for expos, that you get interesting buildings and they all disappear and they get packed away into containers. These things are probably the predominance of the kind of the emergence of these things maybe is telling us that that's going to be a new form of architecture that's going to be part of normality.
I guess it's not for us to decide.
Yeah, it's architecture, but if you experience it as sculpture, that's wonderful. If you can do that,
You can experience it as a performance as well. I mean, because it's something that changes over time. It's not static. It's something that is kind of morphs. So yeah, maybe it's a performance. Buildings need to have a lot of character from the maker, in a way. The designers and the makers of each kind of work leaving their mark on the building. I think it's something that you will be able to read into it for a long time after. And then I think will mean that, obviously, that people who use it will kind of enjoy it. They'll be able to sort of read.
It's kind of more capacity. There's more capacity in this thing. It's more generous to the people using the building in the way that it's generous to the people who made it. In a way, there's opportunity there which often gets lost in kind of reduction of surfaces, a reduction of detailing. Of course, it has a cost. It's a cost reason, but that's just. It's also about kind of time spent on ingenuity and I don't know.
Yeah.
I think we're trying to make generous spaces, and those are probably the ones that people remember best.